Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Good day, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I am your host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate strategy into frontline operations. Today, from a different setting. Today, I am sitting in a shared office at Mission Possible, where I volunteer some time. If you go check out mission-possible.ca, where we help people from the downtown east side of Vancouver to get back on track and get back into the workforce. Today, thank you, Matthew McCormick is our guest today from McCormick Studio. He is the founder and CEO of Matthew McCormick Studios. And we'll talk about the studio and what the studio does. You've 8 years in the making right now, 2000, what did we just say? I forget.
I started in 2013.
2013. A quirk that Mr. McCormick has that maybe not a lot of people know is that Matthew has never had a beer or never had a coffee. So, and he's not a weirdo. He's not a weirdo. Well, depends a little bit. So thank you for being on the show, Matthew. It's lovely to have you on.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
So Matthew, like all my guests, I let you pick what is near and dear to your heart. And with that comes the title of the show. So what is the title of the show that you've picked?
The title of the show today will be Technically Beautiful.
And why is that? Technically Beautiful. Why did you pick that?
They're kind of terms that seem to be in opposition to each other. You know, within business, especially in the business that I'm in the business of design. I'm in the business of creativity. And it's a perfect marriage of both those, especially when we're talking about technology, be it lighting technology, different other types of technology that we use, and how we use them to make things that are to be beautiful and make beautiful things with technology.
Fabulous. So let's tell your story. Let's not talk about McCormick Studios yet. Let's start way back in 1982. I don't know if you're born in 82 or not. It doesn't matter.
Oh, I was just snuck in the 70s there. late 70s.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. So with that said, what's Matthew's story? Where does it start? How does it begin? Where does it go?
Yeah, so it starts in Scarborough, actually. Scarborough, Ontario is where I was born, but I was born and raised in Pickering, a little town called Pickering, Ontario, home of the power plant. If you've ever been to Ontario, people know it. I think even in high school, it was in a lot of my science books because at one point it was the biggest power plant. It produced the most power in the world at one point.
Oh, wow.
So we always thought, well, if anything ever hit the fan, we'd be the first to go. And we always joked about how, we'd always radiate and people from neighboring towns would make fun of us for it. But it was neighboring Toronto, so I could see the CN Tower from my house, so it was never too far. And I grew up in, like I said, a little town, Pickering, and was always a rambunctious, very creative kid. Was always into art. Was a little bit of a pretty good artist. I'm prefacing myself, I don't want to say phenom, but at the age of 12, I already had I had 2 pieces in the Robert McLaughlin art gallery in Ontario. And so, studying more classical art, painting and drawing, kind of all fell to the wayside as soon as I discovered girls. And and then but then I always followed my other passions, which were skateboarding, snowboarding, wakeboarding, and any sort of board sports. I was very much into. Did some of them competitively as well, and I ended up before I went to university, I took a year off of school, and that's where I followed a lifelong dream to go to Whistler. And I've always been a big avid snowboarder since the age of 10. when I finished up high school, I went to Whistler for a couple of weeks and just fell in love with it, fell in love with the cultural lifestyle, everything you could think of. Like, you're a teenage boy, of course you're going to love it. And so I went back to school. I went to Ryerson University and studied, for lack of a better term, the business end of design. I always felt that I was good at design. And again, not that I'm necessarily dating myself, but, this was kind of in the era where, computers were becoming a thing, a personal computer. So, back when growing up, I think we both were of the generation where we know what it was like before and what it was after. And so being a designer kind of was going through a bit of a transition. And so studying that, I felt like I was always good. I was good at art. I was always very creative, but I felt like in order to be successful, you had to be the best. And so I'm like, okay, well, if I couldn't be the best, I'd become the boss of the best. And so that's something and that's what I went to school for. And even though a lot of my colleagues and people I went to school with went on to get more into the business end of things, I went the creative route. And so some of my earliest jobs was working in ad agencies, starting off as a desktop publisher, then designer, then lead designer, then art director, then creative director, working my way up through the ranks. But after university, I think it was like 3 days after university is when I was like, okay, I'm going to take the summer off. I'm going to move to Whistler and go have fun there. Well, once Whistler's got a hold of you, 2 months, 2 years turned into, 2 months turned into 2 years. And, I just had a blast, snowboarding virtually every single day and learning a lot about myself and my, building character for sure. Lots of character building times up there. And before I moved down to the city, and then I did a stint at I was in-house art director for a number of years for a few different companies before I very much stumbled upon the career I'm in now.
So how did Matthew McCormick come up? Like, when did you decide to go into? So tell us, what does Matthew McCormick Studios do currently? What is it?
Currently, we are a high-end decorative lighting company. We produce beautiful decorative light fixtures, both locally as well as internationally, and sell them globally.
Okay. And so how did it spawn? How did and I'm just going to use the biggest dad joke ever. When did the light turn on for McCormick Studios?
Yeah, well, you know what? It's literally what had happened. So the genesis of the company is such that it's funny. My parents used to always give me guff because when I first moved to Whistler, some of the lowest hanging fruit jobs were just, working, being a laborer on job sites. I did that for a hot minute, and just a funny little anecdote with that. So that was my very first job when I got there, laborer. And it was funny. One of the owners, I was working on this job site for this $1 million home. And the owner of the company who does these $1 million homes rolls up and starts talking to my foreman. And I hear him talking about design. And so I kind of wander over, and the foreman's like, "Oh yeah, Matt here. He went to school for design." And I talked for me like 5 minutes. And then I remember the owner of the company looking at my foreman, looking at me. That was the last time I worked on that job site. He pulled me out, and I was doing all the marketing for this $1 million home, and end up winning all these awards. And so I maintained working in advertising even while working in Whistler. But I need to get a free season pass. I couldn't afford a $1,800 pass at the time. So I worked for a hotel that was owned by Interwest at the time. And I worked in maintenance. And, again, this is a brand new hotel, so it didn't really need a lot of maintenance. But I got to learn about, although I already knew it, but, drywalling, how to fix like a thermocoupler on a gas fireplace, or to replace a dishwasher, or fix tiles and stuff like that. And although my parents used to give me guff, and this will all come full circle, I promise, gave me guff about, like, "Oh, you're wasting your degree." I mean, there was a lot of life lessons I was learning and life skills. So fast forward many years later, I'm now living in the city. I have a good job and what have you. And I go to buy my first place. I want to gut it, and I got the quote what it would cost for me to completely gut it, and it was outrageous. And so I'm like, I can do this myself. And so I completely got the place, did it all myself. If there was times I was living with, like, my toilet was literally on my balcony, my kitchen sink was in my parking stall. I was using the coffee shop beside me as a washroom, and I would shower at work. That went on for several months. But when it came to furnishing my place, I'm as you'll soon learn to know that I tend to be pretty particular. And so after looking at like 1,500 different coffee tables, I just make my own. I was looking at all these different couches, design, and had someone fabricate my own couch, my desk, all my furniture, everything I built in the house. But when it came to lighting, it was the same sort of thing. I'm like, I couldn't find what I was looking for, and most great decorative lighting is pretty wildly expensive. So that's when I had my first hand at designing my own lighting. Now, the light bulb moment was when a random dinner guest came by, and he worked in construction. He was an electrical engineer, and he's like, "Oh, I love what you've done with the place." He's like, "Oh, I love the light fixture. Where'd you get it?" And I'm like, "I made it." And he's like, "You made it?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, what about the one over there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I made that one too." And he's like, then he has his own light bulb moment. He's like, "Look, I'm working on a restaurant. Would you be willing to do the lighting there?" I'm like, "For sure." And so I did it. And, the first light I ever did, please don't ever judge me on it, because it was totally not within my vernacular now. But it started off the eventually where we got to, where although this restaurant was all about going from farm to table, and a lot of the aesthetics kind of spoke to that, like mason jars and distressed wood and what have you. I took like pitchforks and saw blades and chains and made this kind of makeshift light of things that you would find on a farm, and made this chandelier for the place. And it felt cohesive in the space, because it spoke the same language as everything. And it's funny, because I had a mentor at the time who was like, "This is so obvious that this is what you need to be doing. How many lights are you going to have to sell before you're making more money doing that than you're making here?" And I'm like, sadly, not that many. And so I made the leap. And you got to imagine, it was a bit of I don't know if this is PG rated, so I'll keep it PG.
No, it's E rated, so you can drop bombs all you want.
Well, yeah, it was a bit of a mindfuck to go from here. I worked my way up through the corporate ladder in a white collar job, so to speak. I had many direct reports. To then I was going to leave the shelter of that, and I was going to go out my own. And for a period, I actually partnered with the guy who originally discovered my work. And so he had electrical contracting company, and I was going to start up this lighting company. So we decided to partner for a short period of time. So for lack of a better term, I essentially apprenticed under him for a year or two, really learning electrical. And so, really big installations, installing like variable frequency drives on the top of Coquitlam Center, and erecting massive scaffolding, and really understanding what goes into doing big, large scale installations, learning electrical. And but while I was doing that, I also had this lighting company I was trying to get off the ground, and I was starting to do double duty. I could be on the roof of Coquitlam Center, but I'm getting a phone call from an architect in California wanting drawings for certain things. And so needless to say, the lighting company started to gain traction. And then I went full in on that in about, I think it was like maybe 2015 is really when I really put the pedal to the metal on the lighting company. And then it just shot off like a rocket. So here I was working out of my father-in-law's, well, at the time was my girlfriend's dad's garage, to then moving into partnering up with some different manufacturers that had 10,000 square foot facilities with $1 million of different equipment. We were able to scale up. We were doing lots of different projects, and so it was very much, the business model was very much around building very site-specific installations for interior designers and architects. And so one question I get a lot, and this may be maybe I'm just snaking your question, so you're gonna have to jump in at any point and interrupt me. But a lot of people ask, well, how'd you make the leap? Like, how'd you like? But I'm like, there wasn't much of a leap. When, as an art director or creative director, you're given a brief or a selling season or a campaign or an initiative that you're going to have to be able to articulate and showcase to an executive team, and have, like, you know, what does this look like in print? What does this look like online? What does this look like in broadcast? And be able to pitch that to an executive team, have buy-in, because they're going to drop millions of dollars, because it's going to run nationally. And then I'd work together with my web team, my broadcast team, my in-store team, to make sure that vision is executed cohesively between all those channels. But it's really that creative process at listening to the brief, pulling things out, that was very similar to when I started to do these custom projects. I'm just sitting with a different type of creative. I'm sitting down with an architect or a interior designer. So I'll be like, give me as much as you can. Like, give me your drawings, give me your detail, like your, you know, there's railing details, all this sorts of stuff. And we could have conversations like, what is the story that this space is trying to tell? And understanding what that is can help. And you never know where the spark of inspiration or that creative process or that entry point will be. And, you know, we can get into that later, where some of the wacky, like, inspiration stuff has come from.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, because I want to highlight, you know, everybody who's not is not an entrepreneur or somebody who started a company thinks, oh, when did you come up with this great idea? Where often at times, and again, I'll use that pun, the light just turns on, and you're just going to happen you're creating this context. You're doing what you love, like you said, right? There's the gap. There's the need, I should say. You cannot find what you're looking for. So there's a need, right? You couldn't find a goddamn couch. So you're like, fuck it, I'm going to make my own couch. And then, so the business is the same thing, right? So when you think about the iPhone, you know, when Steve Jobs was saying, there's nothing out there that uses the power of the hand. Give me something that I can touch and use the power of the hand. So your need was that. And a lot of people go, oh, wow, you're super genius. Well, yes and no. One, there's timing involved. And that's what a lot of people, you've always been creative. You've always wanted to build things and do things. You were just ready for that opportunity when the guy said, hey, do you want to make that for the restaurant? Like, you didn't go out and say, you know what, I'm going to target all the restaurants and I'm going to go to farms and pick up the stuff. You just said, this is who you were. This is what you love to do. And then all of a sudden it just landed on your lap and you went, shit, that's a good idea. And so then the trial and error starts, the period of going, shit, this could work. Let me see. Now, the good friend of yours says, well, how many lights should you be able to sell to be able to transition? Now, that was a good mentorship moment. That's like, damn. That's
I tell you, I've sold lights that are worth more than I was making. One light that's been worth more than I used to make there. So it's definitely worth it.
Exactly, right? And then, so the second component that I think is, that I want us to, you know, address maybe a little bit later on here is I mean, Matt and I work together, right? So, you know, one of the things that Matt was saying is that, you know, when he gets caught up in the business as the CEO, you know, it's very regimented and, you know, this needs to happen and this needs to happen and this needs to happen, where, you know, you lose that ability to be creative. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is there's a massive difference between being a founder and a CEO. So you don't have to be the CEO to be the visionary. The
100%.
CEO,
and oftentimes they're different.
Exactly.
They're different people.
And the COO doesn't have to be your integrator. The CEO can be the integrator. You can say, you know, Nigel Bennett, a friend of mine, just podcast a few podcasts ago. That's what he did. He would constantly try to hire a CEO so that he could stay founder. He can stay creative. But at certain points in your journey, You're saying, well, am I making the time to be creative? And so I think that a critical path that people don't realize is that Matthew needs to be on a ski hill to be creative. He needs to have that, he needs to be in the zone to be creative. So then skiing becomes a business critical activity, because that's where the innovation of the organization is being built. So a lot of people tend to feel guilty. They go, oh, I can't do this. Well, when are you creative? You can't be creative from 9 to 5 on a Tuesday morning. Like, now you can, but you can't just program somebody to do so. You have to give them the ability to be in the zone. And so that's, I think that those are two lessons, I think, from your story so far that need to be said. So you don't just, oh, wow, I got this great idea. Yeah, but timing is more important than actual, the merging of skill and talent versus the need is that touch point. And then secondly, creativity cannot be bottled. It has to be nurtured and brought upon by itself like a flower.
I liken it to, it's, you can't be creative operating from a sense of scarcity. Like it's, it's almost, you have to operate from abundance. So if you're running around like, oh, money, this, I got, I run around got my marketing hat on today, got my accounting hat on this, and then, but then now I've got 20 minutes, I can put my creative hat on. It usually doesn't work. I seem to, but that's not to say, and that's where I think there's, I think some of my early success, maybe for the most part, my continued success is the sense that not only do I have an innate creative ability, but I've nurtured my business acumen my entire career, and that's what I went to school for. It's what why I work with people like yourself. I'm part of different associations, and I'm a perpetual learner in business, because it's funny. Although I work in the area of design, this is my original thought, but so I remember someone saying this once, where artists are selfish, designers are selfless, and I'll explain why. Artists, usually it's creative expression. It's for them. It's to get that out. It's to scratch that itch. Totally get it. And there's a lot of pieces, to be honest, even myself, although I consider myself a designer, there's been a lot of creative endeavors where that's really at its heart what I was doing. I could care less what anyone else thought. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. That's how I started. That light wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. And it was very, like I said, it was very specific to the environment that it was going to reside in. But a designer designs for other people. You're thinking the ergonomics. How are they going to handle this? How is it going to be shipped? How are they? How is it going to be used? How is it going to be maintained? You're always thinking ahead. So it's a slightly different mentality. But at its core, you're kind of problem solving. And in business, you're doing the same thing. But if you can take your creativity to your problem solving, you've got this, nitrous boost that, you can get to things a lot quicker. And so it's this yin and yang. It's not one or the other. If you've got both, you're a superhero. And that's where I really try to pull from both. And I think that's where it's got me to where I am today.
I think
honestly,
there's a couple of things in there, and I want to bring it back to your dining room table, because I think that the just cause, you weren't just so when I want to bring it to just cause, and your just cause, what you could not find, and we won't talk about the couch or anything else. Let's just talk about the dining room light, is you were not able to find something that you wanted to create the mood around, right? Is that correct?
It was truthfully, it was over my it was kind of like dining room kitchen area. Has one bedroom and kids. But
hey, hold on a second. We're talking about Vancouver here. So when you get 12 square feet to live in, you're happy, right?
yeah. Oh, exactly. But it's funny. I never really thought of it the way in which you're describing it, where it was a need that I had found for myself, and by the virtue of this passion that I kind of stumbled upon, other people actually had the same issue, but at a much grander scale. You know, and even some of these early projects, like part of the reason that a lot of the projects that I was working on, it wasn't doing these dining room lights. We're talking about doing a 30-foot by 60-foot, 3,000 pound, 2 trailer loads worth of installation traveling across the country for an installation, say in Virginia. You can't go to the lighting store and buy that.
That's cool. That's so cool.
And that's the difference. And especially when you start ramping things up and your capabilities and your expertise, and then again, valued partnerships with the right people that, you know, it's surround yourself. Go back to my design days. I'm not a web designer. I can speak the language of a lighting designer. I just make sure they can execute on exactly what I'm looking for. I'm not a ticketed machinist, but I know enough about thread pitch. I know a little bit about tolerances. I know a little bit about different materials and why you use some over the others, and understanding that. And even I will say, I don't diminish the naivety is also a bit of a strong suit too. Yeah. You know, I would say even the early days, you know, there could be two approaches. You go to a shop and be like, hey, here's my drawings. I need 30 of these. Give me a price. I'll be back in a week. Or, hey, look, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is how I was thinking about doing it. How would you do it? Oh, I would do it like this, and this, and this. Oh, well, what about doing it like this? They're like, oh, well, you know, we don't do it like that. Well, why? He's like, it's a good question. Let's try it. That little bit of vulnerability, that little bit of naivety would all have been lost if I went in there with my ego, learning from the past, checking the ego at the door, to have the possibility to have collaboration happen that would take your idea and make it 10 times better than it ever could be just being on your own. It has also been very paramount to my success. And so it's also paramount too to be very cognizant of who you surround yourself with. And so you get people who are like-minded and are very collaborative. As you know, in my company, we have a no asshole policy. We always get Snickers when we say that, but it's our number one value. And it's amazing how much crap it cuts out. Because we've all worked for, with, or around one. And you know what? There's enough drama in the day to go around that we don't need it in our day-to-day. And when we really try to align ourselves with people who are, you know, sharing our values and understand the vision, and you'll stop making baby steps and you start making leaps. As soon as I made that distinction, and life becomes a lot easier and a lot smoother when you don't have drama in your life.
You've, one of our core values and brand promises is ignite curiosity. The power of la pregunta, power of the question, is when a kid asks you a question, you feel obligated to help them. You go, hey, I've got a question. You've got children, right? So, Daddy, what's this? Or, how can I do this? And you've got, it comes in a very courageous and Brene Brown vulnerable approach, right? So, hey, I believe that people tend to forget the power of how are you? And so a lot of people, hey, how you doing? And they just move on, where actually asking the question is a demonstration of care as well, when you ask the question well. So we say, hey, Matt, how are you? And I actually pay attention. This demonstrates an intent and a willingness to actually care about what you're saying. So that elevates, that facilitates the conversation, but also elevates the other individual and facilitates the conversation and your ability to extract information from the other person for your own benefit. Right? Because, and so my wife tells me all the time, she's like, you manipulate people. No, I just ask really good questions.
and you know what? And that's you're exactly right. And you know, that's what, especially when there was an evolution in my business when we went from doing very site specific stuff then to like, we had a secondary aha moment or light bulb went off, and we're like, when people started asking for the same things over and over again, we're like, oh hell, we actually have a product line here, and which we'll get into later. But I think one of the best compliments you can get is when a client who may not necessarily be an interior designer or have the same kind of design sense, they're like, oh, this is exactly what I envisioned. Not quite. It was because I asked so many questions. I was an active listener. I translated what you were saying, or I picked up on certain cues, or there's certain sight lines that I paid attention to that line up that, you know, kind of eliminated visual distraction, or, you know, gave you certain sight lines to certain things, you know, and let alone, you know, you want to get into technical, you know, you start talking about lighting temperature and color rendering index and all this sort of stuff, so that when you're sitting down to eat your food, let's just say, the great example, we all know what we look like under ugly lights. You get under a fluorescent light that's flickering at a certain hertz, the color rendering is shifting everything purple or pink, and you know, you're just tired and cranky under them, and people don't realize that it's because of the old technology that we're using. And with a lot of the new biomimicry and the rhythms that people go through and the technology that are going into some of these lights, you know, we're getting into lights that are making you feel well, and that represent when you're eating your steak, it doesn't look green, it looks red. You know, it's all these things are important as well. So it, you know, the title of the show is for that reason. It's technically beautiful. It's beautiful, but technically it's all there as well.
That's
so there's
crazy.
Nothing that we don't.
Yeah, I didn't know that I didn't know that there was so much behind lighting, right? I knew that. I hate every time I go somewhere, people go, like in an office back before COVID, they go, why are your lights not on? Because I said, I absolutely despise neons. Despise them. I'd rather work in the dark than work under neon. Now I know.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the frequency we work with electromagnetic fields that, I mean, we capture so much from our eyes. So, so that kind of, I want to bring it back to the, you know, the foundation was about creating this environment. So I'm assuming, you know, when you're building a business, the importance, you know, like Matt was saying before, you go into a place and they go, well, you know, look at what the client really wants. Listen to what the client wants. Now, if you've got a doohickey or a widget, it's you've got that. If you want to be continuously improving your portfolio, listen to what people are saying, and don't just really go, oh, we need to do market research and this is what they want and this is what they want. Just if you ask, just simply ask, you know, a market data research, I don't know, and the marketing agency are going to shoot me for saying that, but really, do you really need to spend $15,000 to have these groups tell you what you like? Come on, if you go out there, if you go to the grocery store, or you go somewhere and you go and say, what do you like about this? Now, some people might think you're a freak because you're approaching these people with asking about lights. But my point being that you don't have to go far and you don't have to invest in so much to really understand and to pay attention and ask the right questions. I think that's the key for that. So tell us, when did you, you've gone, buddy asks you about doing this, you're doing like a 2-ton, you know, chandelier in Virginia. When did you go, shit, I got a business here? Like, this is more than just me.
It wasn't, let me just think here. Well, you know what, I'd probably say it was in around that, I was doing a lot of these custom projects up until 2015, but it was maybe right around 2015 where, you know, it was one of our, I'm trying to think of the very first one. I think it was our halo light, which is the ring. Little backstory on that, and it's a great anecdote for how we did a transition. So here we were. There's the interior design show that typically happens every year here in Vancouver, and there's one in Toronto as well that usually happens in the winter. Every year there's usually, it's where the whole industry comes together. They create their booths, different companies showcase their wares, what have you. And every year there's usually a main sponsor that has a VIP booth. And so I had a couple friends of mine who were building up this massive VIP booth, and they wanted to have a center stage kind of chandelier of some sort. And the main sponsor was Bottega, and Bottega, for people who don't know, is an Italian prosecco company. And if you've ever seen their bottle, it's very iconic because it's gold foiled. And so when the crummy thing is, I think I had less than 6 weeks, less than 6 weeks before the show began. And the real genius was the way in which I pitched it, because I had this idea banging around in my head forever about this kind of bubbly looking light utilizing these rings. And when my friend approached me to look, I've got this VIP booth and we want to do a custom installation. Would you be interested in doing it? Like, what would you do here? And I just sketched this up really quickly. And she was like, "You're a genius. Like, how'd you even come up?" I'm like, I've had this in my book for the past year. It's, I've been just waiting for the right opportunity. Right. And that was always the case with people. A lot of times too, I really never tried to push my agenda or my designs on people, but there would be times where people like, "Look, here's our envelope. This is our space. What would you do here?" And, I could make something I could make something very site specific and leverage with some of the information that they're giving me. Or I'm like, what are the things that I've just been sketching or I've just had a real passion around? What would fit? Could I make one of these things fit? And in this particular case, it did. And so one of the other things too, especially with a lot of these design shows, and I've pulled this move off a few different times. They're typically in these massive conference rooms that have in the case of Vancouver, we're talking 60 plus foot high ceilings. But everyone always thinks of their 10 by 10 by 10 box. There's my vignette. I'm going to create a kitchen, or I'm going to create a bathroom, a bedroom scene. And I'm like, we have this VIP booth that's really large, but we have 60-foot ceilings. I'm going to do a 3-story installation here. I want anyone, you can be anywhere in this conference room, be like, I want to create up, a beacon. And there it is. There it is. You could be 100 feet away and be like, holy shit, what's that? It's a beacon. And the only way you can actually see the whole thing is because it undulates out of this booth. The only way you can get there is if you have to be a VIP to go in to see what's really going on in there. And we had to come down really quite low to almost face level. And so that's what I did. We raced to create something where I won't get on the technical stuff, but even the housing itself, I wanted to be I wanted it to be gold because it speak to the gold. And when I think about prosecco, you think about the bubbles. And so I just put together a quick little brief. I'm like, here's your brand. Here, here's some inspiration images, mood boards of bubbles. This is the installation that I'm considering. This is what it's going to look like in plan. Here's the elevation drawing. And they're like, done, go. I got 3 weeks at this point. And so we're able to do it. It wasn't exactly the way I would have wanted it, because there's a lot of things that had to be figured out, from the dimming technology to the lamping technology to even the way in which it was mechanically fastened. But it worked for the show. It was safe and worked for the show. But it went gangbusters. People were calling about, where can I get this? I want a version of it. And and I quickly was able to. I even just parsed out the light I had here. I only had a handful. I only had 10 of these fixtures, and so I'm like, here's 3, here's 4, here, and then I'm like, okay, well, I've got an opportunity here now to iterate on this product. And it was shortly thereafter. Then then there was a couple. Then inadvertently, doing the custom lighting, inherently I was building a product line the whole time. And what it afforded me to do was almost get a proof of concept. You know,
Mm.
I would be commissioned to create these installations, and they would be my authorship, my own designs, and so they're bought and paid for. And if if someone liked it, I'd start getting calls for it. And then it wasn't too long after, we had another project where people were like, "Oh, I love what you've done there, but it was way too big for my house. Would you be able to do one a little bit smaller?" And so I did one, and then, "Oh, I like what you did over there. Can I get 3 of them?" And then it started to mushroom on that. I'm like, okay, now we've got a product line on our hands. So now here we have a fully bespoke end of my business that is strictly site specific one-offs. And then on the other end, we have this standard line of product where, for lack of a better term, you could just sell while you're sleeping, right? And we also have this middle ground. And this was also one of our big differentiators, and continues to be, where we could take our standardized product and we can make it to measure. So if you wanted a 5-story cascading chandelier down a stairwell, we could do it. If you wanted to be undulating over your dining room table or over a complete dining room, we could do it. And so we really leverage our custom know-how. Now, to date, we rely heavily on our standardized product. We've moved to a point where it is a commercially viable product, meaning that, previously doing one-off stuff is not the most effective way of doing anything. If you wanted to make, which I know it's blurred, if you wanted to make just this one pen, this would be a $10,000 pen. And so doing if the molds, the this and that, the extrusions, you name it, it's really expensive. So doing custom stuff, not only is it really expensive, so you have to find the client with the appetite for that, but it's a huge human resource for sure. There's no question. Some of these projects, 6 months, year, 3 years, like 5. I've been on projects. The longest I think is a 5-year-old project that I've worked on. And so you got to imagine that you got to be able to make sure that you can remain profitable through all that, and there isn't a ton of scope creep and you're bleeding your eyeballs out.
I think that another lesson that people should listen to in what you've done is you've had somebody pay for your R&D, and so exactly. So if you have somebody ready and willing to adopt one of your innovation, right, and you have somebody pay for it, then you've come out unintentionally. You've come out and realize, oh my goodness, now you know that. Oh well, let me see if I can replicate that. Let me see where else I can be very creative and innovative, that somebody wants a one-off for, pay for the one-off, and saying, well, how do I leverage that? How do I leverage what I've created here that is going to be for the masses, right? So, and that's what a lot of people don't think of doing for organizations. They go volume first. Oh, I've got a great idea. Let's make 10,000 of them. I say, no. The great companies, they'll say, okay, here's an idea. And there's a few companies that do it well with, these innovative, especially in consumer packaged goods. They'll go, I've got a orange, vanilla, I don't know, lemonade flavored of this. Very short period of time, they make a small batch, they put it out there, see if it connects, right? Where you have a different way of doing it, where you go, hey, I'm going to make something that is ginormous and see what part of this ginormous piece of innovation can I rip out and create models from. So I think that's a very innovative way of also thinking. Now, it could be applicable only for you, but I'm trying to think of other ways that, in the service industry, you could be hired to do a presentation or a talk or something to help one company, to which you go, oh my, I can take out module 1 and 5 and make it its own product. And so, it applies to a lot more than just lighting, but I think that's something that you did extremely well in leveraging that somebody is paid for your innovation.
And yeah, and I like to say it was part of my grand plan, but I think it was definitely very organic to begin with. But one of the things that allowed me to do is to iterate, and much to the chagrin of maybe some of my team members at the time. Even though we had done it once, I was never satisfied. It was like, how do we get rid of gear? How do we refine it? And it was never a race to the bottom. It was always for me. My creative process is iterative. I like doing iterations, and it's kind of a process of reduction. I like to take things away and just like get it down to its most essential form. And I think I know with a lot of my products tend to be very bold and very have high impact, but that's where they actually have that little bit of flexibility. They can go into a traditional looking home, but then they can go sit on the coast of Lake Como in Italy and feel just as well as home in a very beautiful, bold home. And so I've kind of taken that line of thinking into many different things. So even with we've transitioned that into product, and I'm thinking even jumping a little bit ahead with some of the stuff that we're working through now, where taking things now taking a product to market. I now know what's involved, and to from ideation to having an inventory can take 12 to 24, sometimes 36 months, and a whole lot of money, and it might just fall flat. And so you have no idea if this is going to work or not. And so and that's why it's also good to diversify. And I think one of the things that also worked out really well, there's this one guy I met with years ago, and he was one who said it, and it was right around when I was transitioning into product. He's like, I love what you're doing. I love the magic that you create with some of these spaces with these massive installations. And he goes, I liken it to, but now you're starting to offer smaller versions of it. He goes, I liken it to, like, he's a very suave guy. He's like, I liken it to a Gucci suit. Everyone wants a Gucci suit. They might not be able to afford a Gucci suit. They can buy a Gucci brooch and feel like they still have a piece of the magic. So in doing that, and especially even with what we're doing now, although we're transitioning fully over to the custom, inline standardized product, and we're still able to customize it. We're a lot more discerning on the custom projects that we take on now. And they have to follow, a certain, there's certain criteria that we follow in order for we take that on. And so, and one of them is, truth be told, it's profile. Like, what sort of profile does this offer? So when we've had offers, and we've done projects at the Victoria Albert Museum in London, which we've talked about before. It's probably one of the biggest feathers in my caps. It's the most culturally, it's the biggest cultural design museum in the world, and to be able to exhibit some of your work there, I liken it to going to the Olympics and winning gold. Like, you just can't take that off your resume. You can't take that off your resume. Or presenting your work at Rosanna Lundy in Milan during Design Week. It's like, you're talking about the pinnacles. And so, although I say that all very, very humbly, and this career has taken me to places I've never thought I'd be, from Dubai to London to Belgium to Italy to Paris, and that's on one trip. And I come home, and it's pretty wild.
So what's two more questions. The first question is, so now you're in the design industry. What's difficult? What's the one thing that you find? Let me rephrase that. What is the one thing that you find difficult as a CEO who's very creative, who's very design oriented, and you're running your business? What's the one thing that you say, oh man, I need to work more on this? Because there's a lot of people who are listening to this who are uber creative, right? And that, or have great ideas like you, and they want to say, well, what are the pitfalls? I'm super creative. I do this. What does Matt struggle? Because you've been in this for 8 years now, so close to 10 years. So you know what you're good at, and you know what your areas for improvement are. What's the one thing that you find difficult running a business in the design industry?
I'm trying to just pick one. It's, I'll back out of that a little bit. Like, honestly, and this isn't anything new. You really have to love it. You're never going to work harder in your fucking life. But you'll do it with a smile on your face because you're in complete control. And so I know that the more I put in, the more I get out. And so that if that's focusing on, implementing an ERP system that's going to help us be able to scale to do the next big thing, it may sound super unglamorous, but it's going to drive efficiencies in my business it will be a means to an end where, I don't have to worry about that anymore. And I've got systems and, standard operating practices around certain things. So now I can just focus over here. I think a lot of it is patience as well. We all want it now. We all want to let's drop in, let's spend $200,000 and get all these products. People are going to buy them. It's going to run like hotcakes. I'd rather run a little bit slower. And I think one of the things, I don't really talk about really ever. And I know my PR manager, she always kind of she really presses it, is that, this has all been self-funded. And so, this wasn't, this wasn't an inheritance. This wasn't people, an investor dropping $1 million to make this happen. This is whatever I make, put back in, whatever I make, put back in, whatever I make, put back in, take a very modest salary, for the first several years. Because it's something I truly believe in. And, there's a lot of different ways you can spend your time and your money. I know within myself that if it's something that I really want, I have a gear in me that I can command more out of me than anyone could possibly ever expect. And I can just go. And there's no quit. And so the challenge is, it's the patience too, I understand, I intellectually the patience, but I want to be doing, I want to be doing the creative, but I understand that I tend to also take a very high view of things. There's the days, there's the day in, day out stuff. There's the peaks and the valleys that every company goes through. But if this is something that I want to be doing long term, whatever the hurdle it is, the new hurdle that's going to be in front of you today, understand that you pull back. This is just a point in time, and understand that you're actually in control this whole time, and you're doing what you want to be doing. And there's a price to pay. You got to pay to play a little bit, but it's all a means to end, and you have to love it. And you have to love the process. And so, it might be, I've had my business hat on for, a number of years to build out some of these systems that can be sustainable. And if I want to peace out and go on a heli trip for 2 weeks and come back so super jazzed, or go to Italy for a week and just do a residency at a globe blowing studio and learn all about the best Milano glass in the world, that's the magic to me. And so that doesn't happen overnight either. And so enjoying the process, as people would say, I enjoy putting the jersey on. That's it. I've already won. I don't have an asshole boss. I don't work with assholes, and I don't work with assholes around me. I've won.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So last question is, what's the one thing recently or further back, what's the one piece of reference material or person that has made a difference in your life? It may be a book, maybe a person, recently or far, that defines who you are today and that you always go back to. Or it defines you as you are now as well. It could be more recent.
That's a really hard one. That's a really hard one. There's so many. I'm not gonna fake the funk. I'm not necessarily a super avid reader per se. Definitely a lot of different books on audio books. There was a period of my life, where I was very deep into a yoga practice and meditation and mentorship and coaching and all that sort of stuff. And so I know I'm just going to go straight from the heart. There was one of the things that one of my yoga teachers used to tell me all the time, and it was one of the things his teacher would say. He's like, and I'm not going to put the accent on that he put on, because it's like, keep practicing and all is coming. And it's just the keep going. Whatever you focus on, you will attract. Just keep going. And it's the part I like about it is it's just keep practicing. You're never not, the goal is not to finish the race. The goal is to stay in the race. And
it's so funny. I was helping a company get through an LP, a cannabis LP, and we worked our asses off to get the license. And everybody's like, "Oh, when we get the license, we're gonna, da 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 da." And then we got the license, and there's restrictions involved, and everybody's like, "High five, yeah, good job." And we're kind of like fizzled out. And you're like, the journey was more interesting than the final result. And therefore your practice, you're correct, right? I mean, Matt and I, like I said, worked together and we dive down into the business. And I always say, what's the direction? What are we eliminating? What are we automating to ultimately liberate your time? And so 100%. when you do that every single day, at a certain point, those minutes add up. And then all of a sudden,
100%.
You find out and you go, oh, wow. That's a key to success. Because I think, what's the one thing, between you and I, what we've been working on, what's the one thing that's been very powerful for you from working together in regards to that continuous improvement thought process?
I would definitely say this with you, and it's conducive to any good coach or person that you would bring in. It's for me. I'm always about best business practices. Mm-hmm. No one wants to learn from the school of hard knocks. Mm-hmm. I used the term before. I don't want to take baby steps. I want to make leaps. Mm-hmm. Surround yourself with the right type of people. With the same value, same vision, they're on board, and that can, eat some apple pie, humble pie. Yeah, some humble apple pie. Not hungry. And you know what? Be like, look, what best business practice? How could I be doing this better? That could be in design. That could be in life. That could be in business. How can I be doing this better? How can I be more efficient with my time? How can I be a better business person? How can I be a better leader? How can I be a better partner? It's all these all come into play. And working with someone like yourself, who've not only worked specifically in this capacity, but in the variations of different industries. Business is business at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. It's money in, money out. Make sure there's a profit margin, make sure there's certain this and that. But how do you be the best? And you work with the best. You be the boss of the best.
Full circle. Look at that. Awesome. Thank you so very much, Matthew, for being on the show. Always having creative people on the show is just always fun. It's just nonstop circle of going back and forth. So thank you very much for being on the show, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
So with that being said, my name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate strategies into frontline operations. And like my social media team will tell me to tell you, please like, subscribe, and whatever else you have to do to appease the social media gods, and so I don't get in trouble, okay? All right, fabulous. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.